You ready to steal more TTRPG rules? Shadowdark RPG is a gritty, old-school dungeon crawler right down to the black and white art. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably heard about the ultra-successful Kickstarter run by Kelsey Dion at the Arcane Library. People really seem to want this thing. And now that I've finally gotten around to checking it out, let's talk about some rules and mechanics you can steal from it to add into your D&D or Pathfinder game. The first rule to steal is always on initiative. Like one of my favorite non-5e games, Index Card RPG, Shadowdark is always in turns. That means that the session starts off with an initiative roll and then everyone goes around the table narrating their actions and choices in order. And the game splits this up into combat rounds and what's called crawling rounds. It's not like the rigid 6 seconds per round that D&D uses and can be more free-form and loosey-goosey. But what I like about this is that when the action is going around in a predictable order, I think you'll see less spotlight stealing. Also, if you know when your turn to do something is coming up, I think you'll see more careful consideration of actions and time to ponder reactions to things that have already happened. And it's important in this game because many things in Shadowdark operate on countdown timers. For example, the Alter Self spell lasts for 5 rounds, which is important out of combat. You know from my other videos that I'm a huge fan of using timers to create tension and motivate players. So I think you could easily add this sort of always in turn mechanic to any Pathfinder or D&D game as a way of managing the rotation of action at the table. And it's important to track time in Shadowdark because of light. Here's where the game gets gritty for real. An hour of real life time at the table equals an hour of game time in most circumstances. This comes into play heavily as it relates to light sources because PCs just don't get dark vision. Plus, most non-humanoid monsters do get dark vision, which is a pretty intense tipping of the scales. So torches become a crucial resource, and in the dark, most tasks are at disadvantage. I feel like in 5e, the designers just decided that most tables don't like tracking and messing around with light sources, which is why most species get dark vision. Pretty much everyone except for humans and halflings, right? But Shadowdark uses the dark for more than just the fiddly measuring of bright and dim light distances. Namely, in the dark, random encounter frequency ratchets up to what the game calls a deadly level. Yikes. And so the mechanic I'm telling you to steal here is basically darkness. Even if your PCs have dark vision, that doesn't mean you can't still use the darkness to add tension. Here I'll reference Sly Flourish's excellent article, Dark Vision Isn't As Good As You Think. Because technically, dark vision only turns darkness into dim light in 5e, which could still cause disadvantage on perception checks. I think many DMs just hand-wave this. But since D&D and Pathfinder are essentially games about resource management and tough decisions, I feel like this is a good one to not skip over. Do you light the torch so you can see in the dungeon, knowing that it will likely give away your position or otherwise attract attention? Next, let's talk about gear slots. Shadowdark lets you have a specific number of items in your inventory, kind of like Blades in the Dark, and that number is 10 or your strength score, whichever number is higher. And kudos to the designer for including an actual stat in the game mechanics. Those numbers should be useful for more things than just determining your modifiers. Anywho, what makes Shadowdark's gear system clever is that it's more than just the coil of rope and the 10-foot pole taking up those slots. The critical thing is that magic items take up a slot. Every 100 coins carried takes up a slot. Now, all of a sudden, whether you equip that second coil of rope becomes a meaningful choice. You might have to decide between ditching one of your all-important torches to pick up that chest full of gold. Yeah, of course you want the gold, but running out of torches is a possible death sentence. Ooh, that's a juicy conundrum. 5e has a little taste of this with attunement slots. When you only have 3 of those suckers, it does make for some tough decisions about which magic items to equip. And so what's the rule to steal here? I think sometimes dungeon masters should give their players things that are physically difficult to carry. Instead of 1,000 gold pieces worth of gems, let them find a golden statue that's too big to insert into a handy haversack or bag of holding. Make the physical transportation of items a mechanic they have to deal with. Sure, the party might use telekinesis or some other form of magical transport, and that's fine. The point here is that it's just another type of puzzle to present to your players, to let them use their wits and the tools at their disposal to solve it. Or you could just be strict about encumbrance rules. I think, like Dark Vision, that one gets hand-waved quite a bit too. Initiative, light, and gear slots are the main rules I wanted to cover from this game, but there are a handful of smaller rules and mechanics that I think are also very useful to steal. So we're gonna go kinda rapid fire from here to the end. Cool? Cool. So fourth on our list is the death timer. Instead of a flat 3 successes and 3 failures after you drop to 0 HP, you get 1d4 plus your con modifier, and that's how many rounds until you're dead. I've always thought you should be able to add your con modifier to death saving throws, because it makes more sense that hardier creatures would be able to better resist the icy pull of death, right? So consider stealing that for your game. Next on our list is alignment. I've always had a love-hate relationship with alignment, and that I think it can be useful as a shorthand for monsters, but it can be problematic for PCs. I've always liked the theory that it's less of a personality than it is more like a political belief system or a religious belief. Your actions might not always line up with your beliefs, but it's just something you strive for. Shadowdark does away with naming good and evil and instead lists only lawful, neutral, and chaotic. And while good and evil are sort of implied in lawful and chaotic, it does give you a little bit more wiggle room in how this plays out at the table. And I suppose the rule I'm advising you to steal here from Shadowdark isn't a literal rule, but one that I'm more extrapolating. And that is, don't be a hard ass about alignment. If the player piloting a lawful good paladin decides to get a little bit rough during an interrogation with an NPC, just let it happen. And then during the next long rest, ask that player how their PC now feels about their previous actions. The contradiction between what it says on the character sheet versus the PC's actual behavior can lead to some really juicy nuggets of introspective roleplay. But you shut down that exploration the moment you say, that's against your alignment, so you can't do it. The sixth thing to steal. The number 6 item to steal here is the D6 decider. I adore this little rule, and it's something I've been using in my home games for a long time. Whenever a thing could go either way, I often call for a luck check. A 1 to 3 is a bad result, a 4 to 6 is a good result. The example Shadowdark gives is to adjudicate whether or not a dropped torch goes out or stays lit. Not only is this handy for quickly settling a yes-no question that might otherwise slow down the pace of the game, it takes some of the weight and responsibility off the GM's shoulders. Absolutely, you should steal this and add it to your home game. Another thing I like is titles. They're delineated by class, level, and alignment. For example, a lawful fighter goes from squire to cavalier to knight. Shadowdark is pretty non-specific about how to use these titles, only saying that they could present new opportunities. But I think it's just a fun piece of flavor to give to a PC when they level up. To say, now you are known as War Chief Corvarax. It's just cool and will make the player feel cool. So spend a little bit of time coming up with class titles that are relevant to your campaign. You could use them to gatekeep things in your world, like saying that access to a certain holy temple is only available to clerics who have achieved the Templar title. And finally, this is just a neat thing that I enjoy, but that is the magic item idea generator. Roll a d20 3 times to piece together 3 elements of a title. And I'm not going to show you a screenshot of the whole thing because I don't want you to just steal this list. It would be way more fun to make your own. But I'll give you an example. In the chest, you find Krull's Tome of the Horde. How cool is that? If you have the time and the inclination, setting up your own table similar to this one could potentially help you improv better during a session when you need to come up with unexpected magic items on the fly. And so that is 8 rules to steal from the Arcane Library's Shadowdark RPG. This is a game that takes classic OSR-style gameplay and updates it with a few modern conveniences and attitudes. But don't take my word for it, pick up a copy for yourself, it's absolutely worth your money. That's all I have to say about it. Until next time, this is GM Jim, now go out there and make it gritty.